So what happens to the cell if it doesn't regulate right? We have to have checkpoints to make sure that everything is flowing good, everything is going through its right stages as it needs to. So the interphase stage have checkpoints before it goes through that mitosis phase. So after G1, it makes sure the cell is growing properly, functioning well, and getting the nutrients it needs. So that's a checkpoint, making sure it's growing, it's functioning, and it's doing what it needs to do. Our next checkpoint will be after G2. And this is to make sure that our cell replicated correctly. Also to make sure that it has the nutrients it needs and that it is correct growth so it can go through mitosis. And then we have one right before mitosis at a pro-metaphase, which is kind of like a pre-metaphase stage, and it makes sure that that cell is ready to divide. So those checkpoints are there to make sure that the cell is regulating the correct way. And to stop the cell from dividing if there were any mutations that occur. What you do not want is for a cell that has multiple mutations to reproduce. Because if it reproduced at one time, then it's going to continue to reproduce. So what are ways that it regulates? So we have external factors such as physical and chemical signals that will allow for the cell to regulate its normal division. So if we look at this picture, this is a picture of normal cell growth. So once those cells grow and they're touching each other, they have signals to stop their growth. So if that stops the growth, it prevents further damage to the cell. You also have internal, which are proteins that also help with regulating those cells. So there's a protein P53 that helps with maintaining that cell growth and stopping cell growth. So when that is altered, that is how we get illnesses or mutations within that cell growing. So what happens if the cell is mutated? So say it goes through its checkpoints and it finds out that something isn't right with the cell. Maybe the DNA didn't get replicated correctly, something was off with its normal growth. How will that cell perform any type of duty to make sure that that does not go into mitosis? It will do this through a process called apoptosis. Apoptosis is something called cell death. So it programs the cell to die. It uses enzymes to kill off the cell to make sure that that cell does not go through that process of mitosis. A good example that I like to use for students to show apoptosis and to effect is webbed fingers. So when you are an embryo in your mom's stomach, your fingers are webbed together at first. And right before you are born, maybe around that 5th, 6th month stage, the webs in between your fingers starts to go through that programmed cell death. So what it will do, it will kill off those cells and it will separate your digits to where now you have fingers. So what if other things may occur? So if we were to go back and look at that external factors that prevented cell growth, we will see that I made an example of If the cells are touching each other, it will stop growth. But what if it doesn't and it continues to grow? This is what cancer is. So cancer is that disorganized clumps called tumors. And this is where the cell is constantly growing and constantly dividing. And it's constantly dividing and now it's clumping up. So now we have two forms of cancer. We have benign, which means that these are kind of in one area, they don't break off and they're not, really harming to the body. It still takes blood and nutrients from the body, but they don't break off and go other places to grow. Then you have malignant tumors, which are metastasized. They break away and they form more tumors and take much more nutrients away from the body. So for someone who has lung cancer, they're taking all the oxygen and blood and nutrient that the lung needs to feed on that tumor. And say it might break away and move to your stomach. Then you have stomach cancer, where it is taking the blood and the nutrients that your stomach needs. So that's why that is dangerous. And this is just a picture to explain what I said about how cancerous cells grow. They don't have that external factor that says, hey, let's stop growing. We have grew enough. And they just continue to clump on top of each other. Or it may have that internal factor, such as a protein, that doesn't help with stopping that growth of that cell. So there are ways that you can stop the growth, and then there are ways that you can promote growth. So we have carcinogens, which are substances that are known to promote cancer. So a good example I like to use is charcoal. When we are barbecuing our food, charcoal is a known carcinogen that promotes the growth of cancer. So just knowing what carcinogen is and how it can promote cancer, especially if you're at higher risk through genetics to have cancer, that is very important to know. Then you have standard cancer treatment that temporarily kills our cancerous and healthy cells. So if you know somebody that has had cancer and they go through chemotherapy, they tend to lose their hair. And the reason behind them losing their hair is because cancer cells are rapidly growing, rapidly dividing. Your hair cells is also rapidly dividing at that same rate. So chemotherapy is triggered to stop cells from constantly dividing. So as a side effect, it will stop the growth of your hair cells, which will then cause your hair to fall out because you don't have your hair constantly dividing to grow new hair cells. So that's one of the reasons why if you see somebody that's on chemotherapy, that is why their hair grow out, because that drug is tailored to stop rapid growth of cells, and your hair is dividing almost the same rate as cancer cells.